Hello and welcome to another episode of Rocket Revenue, where we talk about building a predictable and repeatable revenue source. And we open source what we're doing at Rocket Shipping in the meantime as a way of learning from what we are doing and the mistakes we make and sharing that with the rest of you and hopefully along the way getting better. Today's episode is going to be really interesting. We're going to break down the movie Gladiator into 4 segments of rules of engagement. And in fact, we're not talking about Gladiator, but Caesar will be discussed. Today, Barter is going to take you guys on a journey of what we're doing at Rocket Shipping to establish rules of engagement among sales reps. It's not the most fun thing to do. It could just be the Wild West, and it has been, but we're getting to the stage where it might make sense to put in some guardrails and some discussions before they start or arguments, right? So Barter, without further ado, I just found out, actually, before I go further, I just found out that our marketing director, Elena, has never seen Gladiator.
It's a crying shame.
I wasn't going to bring it up, but it felt wrong not to. And so, like, I don't know if you guys are listening to this. If you haven't seen Gladiator, probably just tune out now. You won't understand the rest of the episode, but how could you not? How could you not have seen it? Doesn't matter what age you are. I think it's a timeless classic.
I mean, it probably came out around when she was born, right? Probably a few years old, if I had to guess, right? Something like that. So, like, I think, like, all right, did I see every movie in, like, 1986 or whenever, when I was, like, a couple years old?
No, wait a minute. That means that we're old.
I've seen quite a few. Dude, I'll tell you one that was real weird is, like, I saw a TikTok about Who Framed Roger Rabbit over the weekend. And they're like, this movie's a classic. I'm like, yeah, it is. It's absolutely a classic. I vividly remember seeing it in the movie theater. It came out in 1989. How do I remember seeing it in the theater? I remember. I saw it in the movie theater, and then we got the VHS later. Like, I saw it with my dad in the movie theater.
I think there wasn't as many movies back then. Like, they just stayed in the theaters longer, or they brought them back for something.
No, man, I remember seeing the classic Indiana Jones in the theater in Maine. I remember, like, I'm just old. I just remember these movies, seeing them in the Dick Tracy. That's definitely probably an 80s movie or early 90s. Like, I'm just old.
Yeah. You ever been in a conversation with someone and you just don't relate at all? That's where I'm at right now, because I didn't see any of those. And now, for our listeners and for our audience, in full transparency, I now understand why Elena hasn't seen Gladiator, because I haven't seen Roger Rabbit being framed.
Dude, massive mistake. First off,
Shoot.
Who Framed Roger Rabbit is one of the great. That's one of the great kid movies.
This went off the rails quickly.
I know, but this is important, right?
That's my fault.
Who Framed Roger Rabbit? They take Looney Tunes, right? Bugs Bunny, Daffy Duck, and Disney. So they have a scene of Daffy Duck and Donald Duck, like, dueling pianos and, like, doing all this, like, cartoon violence. It's one of the greatest, like, kid movies ever.
And the thing is that, like, I'm a Disney guy. I'm a Disney dad, hashtag Disney dad. And I did a VIP Disney trip, and I should be sponsored by Disney because of that. It's the only way to afford it. But I mean, I can't believe this. It's like a cardinal sin of being a Disney dad, not having seen Who Framed Roger Rabbit. So that's what I'll do after this.
Dude, it is,
because I don't actually have anything else to do. We're just podcasters, Barter. We say we run a business, but we really just record podcasts. And I went on a 1-month hiatus, and that's why you haven't seen my face for a bit if you've been following along. But I'm back, and I would say better than ever. I can't guarantee that. But Barter, why would we have a rules of engagement? Can you just give me, like, a basic high level of why orgs have them in the first place?
Yeah. So at some point in, like, as you're growing a sales team, salespeople will begin to step on each other's toes. They'll begin to call a lead that the other one was calling. And then it's like, oh, were they really calling it? They barely had a conversation. Like, who owns this lead if this guy hasn't talked to it for 2 months and I want to work it? I have a referral or whatever. You just feel like working it and no one else really is. Well, who owns it? You have to establish effectively a rules of engagement in terms of, like, all right, when does someone own a lead? When don't they own a lead? When do they lose ownership of a lead? Because if not, then someone would own all of the leads if they just made one phone call on every single one. And that's a problem. So, you need to, what I would call in outside sales is carve territory, right? I knew my territory really well when it came to outside sales. I had a zip code. I had a map on a piece of paper that was just well defined. This side of the street is yours. The other side of the street, don't go over there. That's somebody else's territory. You have
Stay
to
out
be
of there.
within this zip code. That's what you work. It's a little bit different when you're in, tech sales or in sales in general, inside sales, right? So you have to know, all right, well, whose territory is what? Who's calling on what? Who owns what? And you're right. We started off, kind of still are really the Wild West, So
Yeah.
if someone ships 50 LTL shipments or more a month, we work it. But there's no difference between someone working a 51, whoever's working a 50 LTL shipment a month customer can also work a 5,000 LTL shipment a month customer. There is no territory carved of like, no, that's enterprise. You can't work that. It's, yeah, you bring more of those over if you can
Please
handle it,
do.
right?
Yeah.
So, but that can be tough because then it's like, well, wait a minute, now we have someone that is more specializing on the enterprise side and is really knowledgeable, like phenomenal knowledge and phenomenal sales skills, like very good, very solid instincts. And it's like, well, we may want them to handle more of those enterprise opportunities because first off, that's literally their title. And second off, they probably can handle them better based on their experience and based on what they've done in the past. All right,
Yeah.
we need to carve that territory.
If we pause there, like to go a little deeper, like obviously as CEO, I don't care which rep gets it. I
Yeah.
just care that Rocket gets the account. And if I'm looking at it as a meritocracy, which is what we are at Rocket, we run it as a meritocracy. I want my best players handling the highest value accounts or the highest probability to close. Those are not always the same thing.
Yep.
But we have a lot of good A players. And
Mm-hmm.
so we've kind of just been able to get away with like letting anybody do anything. The only difference now is that like I don't want to make the rules of engagement. I think you have to, and it's going to be a necessary step because we don't want somebody who's working a deal that goes cold to be sour about another rep going back to that deal and then closing it. And here's the last
Right.
kicker. You'd think, oh, well, they just were a better sales rep. That's why they closed it. That's how it would be like a meritocracy. But we're building new tools and we have new partnerships and our offering gets better over time. So some deals that we lost in the past kind of now are a slam dunk because maybe we didn't have final mile then and we do now. And
Yep.
that's why they said no. And so it's like, well, is it really because they were a better rep that they got that deal or because we made a better product? And then that isn't meritocratic. That's just timing. So we do
Yep.
need some kind of ROE around that.
A lot of it is also just funnel management. If you're able to work everything and things start to go well for you, you start to get deals in, your pipeline's solid across the board. All right, then you're working all of these great deals. You get to the point where you have a little bit more indifference to the ones that may not move as smoothly as other ones. May still be a
Mm-hmm.
great deal, may even be a big deal, but because all of these other ones are moving so smoothly, it's like this is what to me feels like table scraps to someone else might be like a 5-star dinner, and then it's like, all right, well, if you're going to consider that scraps, then we need to get somebody that would consider that to be a 5-star meal to go after it. And
Yeah.
this is just a natural occurrence a good example would be, all right, so we're bringing somebody in that's really enterprise minded. They're going after logos and everything like that, but we didn't have territory carved before. So there's definitely cases where the folks that aren't really going after those logos have ran into some big logos in the past and they may not be working it anymore. It may have been months. But how do we know whether or not that new person in sales that is enterprise minded can have those deals? How do we know who owns what? How do we know what is fair, right?
Yeah.
And so first off, what is a rules of engagement, right? So rules of engagement, it's a document that clearly defines lead ownership based on activity, how that lead is progressed through the sales process, the notes, and at the end, it really comes down to a judgment call as well, which we'll kind of, that's where the Gladiator stuff comes
Yeah.
in. We can talk about
Gladiator
that a
reference.
little
Little
further
teaser.
down the
It's
road.
coming.
So how do you design a rules of engagement? Because I've seen it done right and I've seen it done wrong. You never design a rules of engagement to make things more fair. All right. It's not fair is not a phrase that I like hearing on a sales floor. You make your own level of fairness on a sales floor. Right. The rules of engagement should always be designed based on what brings the deal in most efficiently with the best buyer experience. Right. Because you think about it, if you have no rules of engagement, you have too many salespeople, what's going to happen? Multiple people calling in on the same lead. One doesn't know what the other one was doing. That's a bad buyer experience. You need a rules of engagement to protect the customer from that buyer experience. On the flip side of that, if you overprotect and you try to make it fair, oh, well, they called it once, so they get it for 90 days. All right, cool. So you're protected now, right? So, like we'll call the seller. Well, I was trying to think of a name of one of the ones that I hated in the past, but I can't really think of one off the bat. Bob, right? So
Andrew.
yeah,
I
so
like
this is
Andrew better.
this is Bob's lead because Bob called it 90 days ago, so it's his lead. So now he's good. No one can take it, so he'll eventually get that deal in because no one else is going to touch it, right? Here's the
Yeah.
problem with that is that although it's his lead here and he owns it, none of the competition at other companies give one fuck whether or not he owns that lead for 90 days or not. They're going to keep calling it. So if you overprotect and you give someone too much time to let activity lapse, no one gets the lead there because it goes to the other company that actually knows how to put activity on something, that worked harder, that did better with their follow-up. So that can be an issue with rules of engagement when you try to make it fair. Well, I
Mm-hmm.
want it to be fair. It's like, no, you need to have a little bit of like, you got to move. You got to keep moving. You got to move the ball down the field. You got to have notes on it. You have to do all the right things, and then you get to keep the lead. But if
Yep.
not, you own 0 leads at the company. I own 0 leads. They own 0 leads. Gabe Pankinen owns all of the leads because he
They're all
owns the
mine.
company. They're his leads. They're yours, right? We have the privilege of being able to work them and represent the company. So, in other words, you own nothing and you have the privilege of working the stuff that you have, but you have to prove that you're doing the right thing with it, or else you're at risk of losing that lead. That's
Yeah.
how rules of engagement should be laid out. Is that how it's always laid out? Absolutely not. I've seen it where people say, well, he gets these inbounds and I don't get these inbounds and I should get this. And it's just not fair that I'm getting that. Whenever you try to lay something out in sales with the idea of it being fair instead of it being in the spirit of getting the deal in the most efficiently with the best buyer experience, that's when you get less sales, not more. And anytime that you're doing
Always.
anything where you're getting less sales instead of more, it's a problem. Because, and again, that also it hurts the buyer. It potentially can cause an issue because if you
Yeah.
are in sales and you believe that you have the best solution, you believe that you're doing a disservice to the prospect if they go with somebody else instead of you, then if you're not properly working that lead, you're hurting the customer.
Yeah.
Right?
And if you don't think that, then get a new sales job. Because if you don't actually
Precisely.
have the transference of certainty, and like that's why they're all my leads, because I do think that. I
Yep.
do think, hey, if we're in front of a customer that fits us, that does LTL, does manage truckload, and needs final mile in one platform, there's other solutions to piece that together, but we're the only one that does it well in one platform. And so I just am bullish on that. However, I think that two things from your part was one takeaway is that a lot of times bad rules of engagement leads to those sales reps competing with each other and thinking, yep, that's my competition. Bob is competing with Andrew to see who gets to keep the
Yep.
account. And then ABC company on the other side actually wins the deal. So your real competition
Yep.
is the actual competition. And then
Yep.
two, I've seen it done really poorly in like while I've been at Rocket and in my past career with different partners we've had and with different when I was a sales rep at my last stop, they had really black and white rules of engagement. It did there was no judgment calls. It was black and white. That was easiest for management and easiest for everybody to just be like, it's not fair, but it's black and white. So on the other side of the spectrum, I am like, well, that's not even the most fair, but they did it black and white as a scapegoat. So it's like, oh, if there's one shipment with this one rep 89 days ago, I can't touch it until 90 days, or I can't touch it until 120. Even if the customer, and this is where it's like bad rules of engagement, if the customer wanted to work with a different rep, if they made it vocal, like, hey, I'd rather work with this company, they still just had black and white. It didn't matter. And so at the end of the day, at Rocket, the rules of engagement will be, hey, there is a judge. There's not a jury. There's a judge.
Yep.
There's one person that's going to decide. And it's going to be Troy Barter, and he's going to have the thumb. And this is a reference for the Gladiator folks. I don't know if you've known this, but if you have seen it, this is the reference. Barter gets to go up or down. And if he wants, he can make it dramatic and tremble. and the audience can anticipate if he's going to go up or down. But if you don't have somebody in a meritocracy that can make a unilateral decision, then you can't have successful ROEs, and it won't always be fair.
Yep. And so
It'll be fair to Rocket, but maybe not the rep.
and I've noticed I in the past, the people that created the rules of engagement were often people that never had to work within one. And that will
HR.
forever lead to you making the wrong calls and drafting the wrong rules of engagement. So I can give you an example, right? So an inbound lead comes in. Who owns that? Well, it's very on surface level, you could be like, well, whoever we distribute it to, it's speed to lead. We need to get a hold of it. We need to move quickly. Fair, right? All right. That inbound lead came in because somebody had been working it on outbound and hadn't booked the meeting yet and had been calling them every single week. And it had been a week and a half since the last time that they had gotten a hold of them. And they were starting to get some curiosity going. And then an inbound gets brought in. Why did that inbound come in? Chances are it came in because of the outbound activity. We are in the business of rewarding outbound activity, not dissuading people from it. Outbound's harder than inbound. I can prove it. When I worked at Panadoc, we had an inbound team and an outbound team. And then I said, you guys want to improve the inbounds? Let the outbound guys work the inbound real quick and watch the conversion rates skyrocket because it's so much easier to work inbound than it is to work outbound. They'll be so enthusiastic that they'll absolutely blow everything out of the water. It's exactly what happened. They opened up the cell blocks and they let the inmates go out there and go wild, and they absolutely demolished it. So inbound is obviously easier than outbound. Outbound's tough. Outbound needs rewards as it's being worked properly. So if you're doing all of the right things, you should be getting an inbound off of your outbound activity. So how did we do that? I think it was like 2 weeks. If you had called it within a 2-week time period, or if you had a note to follow up within a certain amount of time, if they said, oh, call me in 3 weeks. So you hadn't called them in 2.5 weeks. And then the inbound comes in and it's like, hey, you can clearly see I was working this. You can see what he said. It's very obvious that he went to submit an inbound because I generated some interest here. You own that lead based on rules of engagement. You own it, not whoever got it off of the round robin. You put them back into the round robin on the inbounds. No harm, no foul. You move on to the next. And you say, look, man, you would want this for you too, right? We reward outbound activity. Is that to make it fair? It's to keep the outbound side motivated. Sure,
Exactly.
it does make it fair. But in outbound, if things are unfair and you're working outbound all of the time, you're not going to work anymore because it's tough.
Yeah.
You need those rewards. And
that's why they call it dangling a carrot, because it was for the workhorses.
Yep.
Like
precisely.
That's what it was for. That's the actual analogy. And that's the same thing. You almost, if you were just listening to you until you said the very last part where he said, is that more fair? Maybe, but that's not why we would do it. It's actually for motivating them and rewarding them for the right behavior. It may end up being fair and motivating them, but that's not always the case. But in that scenario, yes, it is fair to give it to whoever was working it. But also, if you do it just off of some HR department made a rules of engagement and it was just round robins, the most, fair black and white way, then you're actually not being fair to the rep who worked it. So, and then again, it's the same thing I would teach my 5-year-old and my 3-year-old. Is this how you would want to be treated? If you worked hard for this and didn't get it, would you be upset? And so the same principles.
To me, it's not. The reason why I'm saying like it doesn't have to be fair is that life isn't fair. I would say it has to be the same rules for everyone and it has to make sense, right? Because I view sales as a professional sport. Like I view it the exact same way. Just the only sport where they let the amateurs on the field with the professionals. It's our job to sort out who's who, right? It's always kind of how I say it, right? But you think about, all right, the NBA. You're like, the 3-point line is not fair because Steph Curry exists. That's not fair. He can throw it from half court. He can get it to go in. Like they've got 4 rings now at this point off of this. Like if they didn't have the 3-point line, would they have 4 rings? That's not fair. Find a way to stop them. It's the same rules for you. You can throw out 3-pointers the exact same way, And there's times where they've kind of changed it, but they change it and it makes it actually unfair for performers, right? Where they have 3 seconds in the key because Wilt Chamberlain was destroying everybody by just standing in the middle on offense. And it's like, all right, you can be there for 3 seconds and then you got to move, right? Because at that point, it becomes like there's a problem with the parity of the game because there's only one Wilt and everybody else can't possibly do it.
Why you had
win every single time. Like if that's the case. And it's like, all right, it has to make sense. And you look at it and it's like, all right, that makes sense. It's not 15 seconds. It's not 1 second. It's all right. You got to get in there. You can have it for a second, but then you got to get out of the paint and then you got to get back in. All right. It makes sense. Same rules for everybody. All right, cool. Like it's in the spirit of competition. It has to be the same rules for everyone. That's what's fair. Not like it's not fair if I called it once I should get it forever, or it's not fair that this person got this one. And like that's I hate that. I hate it's anytime that I've heard a salesperson say it's not fair, it's usually followed by a loser sentence next. Like
Yeah.
it's not about how they're going to win, it's about why the reasons why they're losing. They're about to hit me with excuses and whine
Yep.
and gripe and be negative, and generally those are people that don't have success. You're not
Not long
finding
term.
ways
Yeah.
to succeed. You're finding reasons why you're failing. All right. You can find a million reasons why you're failing to make yourself feel better. Or you can find the reasons why you could succeed, but it usually leads to more work. It usually leads to a change in your habits. It usually leads to all of these things that you're going to have to do. And it's going to hurt short term, but it's going to feel great long term. And
Yeah.
that's like that's the whole point of an ROE is like it's not about being fair. It's about it making sense, and it's the same rules for everybody. And in that respect, I guess it is fair. It's fair to me.
It's meritocratic. That's
Yep.
what like that isn't always like black and white fair, but it is the most whoever contributes the most gets the bigger gain, which is also like the round robin on inbound as we progress. Like if I go back to what I said earlier, which is I want the highest probability of that lead closing, then maybe it isn't round robin. Maybe it's whoever, if you didn't hit your quota or exceed quota, you're not in the round robin. If you don't have a high enough close rate, you don't get in the round robin, then it is, right? But if we only have one person
Right.
at the time that's exceeded quota or is closing more than 50% or whatever our metric is, then that's the only person that gets an inbound because we have
Yep.
to try to close every deal.
So
Um, yeah.
that's a good segue. So how do you do an ROE? Like how do you lay out an ROE? How do you
If
figure
you
all
made
this
it this
out?
far, this is the value right here. How do you do it? How do you
Yep.
roll it out?
So inbound leads, right? So two things that I want to focus on, right? I want to focus on speed to lead being rewarded, slow to lead being decentivized drastically, and outbound activity is rewarded. Like I was saying, if someone had worked the lead, then it should go to them if it was within a certain amount of time where it is fairly obvious that they probably submitted the inbound because of the outbound activity. We reward that. Why do we reward that? Well, you reward marketing for bringing in an inbound. That's what outbound just did for you. You reward them and you let them work the account that they were already working, and they were actually following up with. Speed to lead. So how do you do that? Well, I think we had it where if a lead went over 24 hours without being contacted, then it automatically got redistributed. You didn't get to work it anymore. If we had a way of doing it, so if someone's listening to this and you have the way of doing it, hit me up. This is my pain, right? Always. I'd like it where if you haven't worked it within an hour of it being distributed, you lose it right away and it goes to somebody else, because everybody knows that if you don't call an inbound lead in the first 5 minutes of it being submitted, the conversion rates drop off of a cliff. Chili
Yep.
Piper has some like really good stuff on this, and I've done content on it and everything like that. But speed to lead is incredibly important. So part of the rules of engagement is what you would call a scarcity tactic. In other words, if you don't work this properly, you will lose it. So there's a fear of loss there of like, you get an inbound lead, you call it right away. And I've had all the excuses in the book from salespeople where they're like, no, I just feel I have this one that I particularly hated. Oh my God, I'll make up a fake name. Erica, not a fake name. Hater, whatever. Can't stand her. And she was like, well, I think that it's like disrespectful. I didn't say her last name. It's okay. I think that it's disrespectful to call the lead as soon as it comes in. And then I haven't even shown that I've done research about the company. Fucking listen for 1 second, please. We can beep it out if you want. When someone submits an inbound, they don't give one shit whether or not you did any research on them before you called. They wanted something, so they want someone to reach back to you, right? That's the whole point. If I submit, I want a demo, get back to me immediately. That's when I wanted the demo. I want it. Let's schedule it. Let's go.
Oh, I
If
feel
you
this.
take time, I didn't just click that button. I also clicked it on two of your competitors, and they already got a hold of me and already bought before you ever reached out to me because you were busy doing research on what school my kids go to. Who cares? What matters, the best impression you get off of inbound is speed. That's it. That's the greatest first impression you can have. The greatest thing you could hear from a prospect when you reach out to them on inbound is, wow, I can't believe how fast you got a hold of me.
It's
Then you're
unbelievable.
like, yeah, we were. That's exactly how we do it. And then when they start to talk about, Well, how is y'all's customer service? You saw how quick I got a hold of you. They move even quicker when you have a problem. What is the average and under how many minutes? 10 minutes, I think, whenever
Yeah.
there's an issue that we get back to them. Well, that I crush sales off of that, where people are like, yeah, well, we're just waiting on the proposal from your competitor. We've been waiting for about a week. I say the same thing every single time. If you're waiting a week to get them to try to sell you to earn your business, how long do you think you're going to have to wait once you buy it and you've got a problem that you need help with?
Yep.
It's going to be
They
a
already
lot
moved on.
longer than that. It's the easiest move. So speed to lead is the best impression that you can have. It's rewarded. Outbound activity is rewarded. So I try to, on inbound, whatever the shortest amount of time I can track and then I can redistribute, that's what it is. If you don't get a hold of it within a half hour, it gets redistributed, fine. If you can do that and you can do it accurately, then you should, because speed to lead is that important when it comes to an inbound lead. Not to mention
Yeah.
the amount that you probably spent to get that inbound lead in. When they're qualified, you better get a hold of them quickly, right? Outbound
And
lead.
people,
Go ahead.
yeah, people will say like the same thing that Erica, and that's an Erica that
By the
worked
way,
with you in
Erica
the
never
past.
worked at our company, for the record. This is a
Yeah, there
completely
was an
different
Erica at
company.
our company, but
There was
not the same
she was in
Erica.
marketing, yeah,
Shout out to our Erica, our previous Erica. She's killing it out there.
we probably should bleep it out. Now that I'm thinking about it, we probably should bleep. We'll bleep that out. It'll be
what
fun.
if we just bleep every time we say it the rest of the show? We just keep saying Erica, and they keep thinking we're swearing. I love it. But no, if if you're a good outbound rep, right, and like you made it into the round robin because of your merit, because you're good, you don't need the research. You can do that live. You can ask them questions and good discovery as you call them. And
Yeah,
so it's also just an indictment on if you have to research a lead. And we've had employees in the past that wanted to always research ahead of time. And, like that was always more of us, they were not wanting to actually cold call,
it's
right? So
fear.
they
Yeah,
prepared. That's
100%.
fear, but this is different. This is an opinion of like this is the right way to do it. It's not
Yep.
fear, and that's an indictment on that type of style too. If you have to be
It's
that prepared. Now, the other thing
yeah.
I want to make a comment. You were speaking while you were going off, and I was like, I feel this because I've bought a lot of software. I've bought Zoom Info and Apollo and Seamless and all of them, right? And I've bought lead generation sources and I've bought outsourced staffing. I have done a lot of like, I got to go to Google and find something and then get a demo booked. I hate when I click get a demo and it goes to like a Calendly, right? Because it's supposed to like be better for me. And this is a hot take. It goes to a Calendly link and the soonest available is in like a week and a half to book an appointment. And I don't know why they do that, but speed to lead and that experience, like they decided, well, this is more convenient. They can schedule right away. And then they made another mistake, which is, but I can't schedule right away. And the reason we ended up going with, I think it was Zoom Info. They did a really nice job of this. We don't use them anymore, but I went with Zoom Info. I had clicked get a demo on like 3 different things, and they called me within 5 minutes on my cell phone,
Yep.
and and then used the power of their platform and be like, I have your cell phone because of my platform. So I called you off of it. It was the best sell. So speed to lead matters more than people realize. And if it is based off of merit, then the best rep should be in that round robin. And it should be, you should have a service level agreement, an SLA on inbound leads.
Yep. And so, like, an example of like it's not fair would be like, all right, an inbound came in, and let's say that you can figure out a way where if they don't work it within 30 minutes, it gets redistributed. You shouldn't be saying it's not fair that I lost that. I had a really good reason. You should think of the ways that you can make yourself more available for inbound leads. Example I could give you is that, back in the day when I worked at Fleetmatics, I never went out for lunch. I had a lunch that I microwaved, and then I sat and I ate right in front of the regional vice president's office that was all glass. And I know that he could see that I was the only person there. And when an inbound came in for that hour in the day, who do you think got every single one of them? Me, before I was even qualified to get them, because I was the only one that was there. So, okay, here you go. Availability is important. Like it's wildly important when it comes to inbounds. It's more important than anything else. I've seen school of
Yeah.
thought where they're like, well, we should give all of the inbounds to the account executives because they know better how to handle them and everything like that. All right. Well, why do you have more account executives than you have like available demos? So they're sitting around and waiting. Well, then that's a waste, because you should have less account executives and you should have more SDRs. They're cheaper and they're going to fill the funnel more than an account executive would. And then it allows those other account executives that now have a super full plate of all of these things to get emotion going, to get some momentum going. So it just never
Yeah.
makes sense to me, particularly on inbounds, because it's like, I want someone that the second that they get hit with it, they're not in a demo, they can call it right away. So just to like
Amen.
try to stay on topic, that's how I view inbounds on rules of engagement.
Yeah.
What about outbound, right? What about an outbound lead that never came inbound? Well, then I would base that on two things. I'd base it on the last activity and the notes. Because let's say on an enterprise level deal, they talk to somebody. We have one that, one of our sellers was working and they said, hey, we're interested, but this is like more of like an end of April type thing. So he has notes that say call middle of April. All right, cool. So he's probably not going to call it at all this month. He doesn't have a reason to. They know, he knows, maybe he'll send an email, but he doesn't have to. We know that that's around their time and he's going to call a little bit beforehand anyways. Cool. We're good. No one should be able to take that lead from him. He's working it
Yeah.
appropriately based on the note. So it's either activity or a note. Now that does open up another conversation of, well, what if they put a note on every single lead that they have? Or what if they put a dial on every single thing that they have? Because then you can't say, hey, if you haven't called that within 30 days on an outbound lead, it's open to anybody. Because if you're not calling something actively within 30 days, what are we really talking about? Outbound, inbound?
Somebody is.
Yeah,
Again, somebody is, and it may not
right.
be from our org. So,
Right. So on that particular one, he's got a note on there. But let's say he
yep.
didn't, right? And it's just like, all right, this is in his funnel. He's called it before, but he hasn't called it in a month. All right, well, if he hasn't called it in a month and he's not working it, if you have a reason to work it, I don't care if you work it. Like, so if within 30 days, if you don't have an activity on something, you don't own that lead. Really, no one owns the lead. Gabe owns the lead. So it doesn't make it, but if you're not actively working that lead, then someone else can. Oh, well,
Yeah.
that's not fair. Well, yeah, it is fair. And it's also a way to make sure that you protect your pipeline, because if you're actively working things, you get to keep them. And like, as
Yeah.
long as you're doing the right thing there. So
It's
what does that create?
contextual too. So just
Mhm.
pause on that. It's contextual. If your deal cycle was a year, then you have to extend those timelines. And if it's a normal buying cycle and it's seasonal, you always have to keep it in context. But we know, and Barter knows, that 30 days is plenty enough time to move a deal forward or not move it. And most of them, especially the SMB or small, medium-sized mid-market, if you're in the discovery phase and you haven't got a meeting within the first month, then you're not getting one. And you need to have somebody else work it. And then maybe they have a referral in or whatever it is. That first few weeks is the most important one to get off that cold call. And they say, I will commit to some type of action.
Yep.
After a month, nothing really happens unless it's an enterprise deal. But then maybe that rep isn't supposed to be working that deal anyways. Maybe then we do need to say, hey, there's enterprise and there's mid-market, but
Yep.
continue.
So the big value ones are inbound. So outbound is usually not as much big value. Most people aren't like, oh, give me that outbound lead that hasn't booked anything. Like, you're gonna have to do all the work on it. It's not like you're getting like a free pass here to have a
Yeah.
previously worked deal. So what are the high value things? Inbound, no sits, which is wild how little a lot of SDRs will work a no sit after like the first week. It's almost like it never occurred. And close lost. Ones where we went through everything and then they ended up not buying. Right. So
Yep.
no sits, it's wild because it's such a high value lead. And when I say no sit, what I mean is we booked a meeting with them, they didn't show up to it. And now we have to rebook them for the meeting because they didn't show up. By the way, half of the time in general, particularly on outbound, it might be a little bit higher depending on where you
Yeah.
are, how the percentages change, but they don't show up, roughly half the time. Maybe you have it where it's like, no, and for us, only 1 out of 4 doesn't show up. All right. A good amount don't show up, right? When you book them. So why would you want to incessantly keep calling them back when they don't show? Well, you've already qualified them. You've already generated some curiosity and interest. You know the right person. You know some things about that particular opportunity. They're pain, hopefully. If you booked a meeting, you should have some pain that you know that you can solve. All of these things that you don't get even on an inbound lead. They submitted
Exactly.
the lead, but you don't have all that stuff already. This is better than an inbound. They just didn't make the meeting. Plenty of people don't make a meeting and then they end up buying down the road, or they might end up buying tomorrow. There might have been a valid reason. So the first thing is you treat no sits like they're an inbound. In other words, the second that they don't show, you should be on that ass calling and emailing and doing everything
Yeah.
that you can to get a hold of them, because it's exactly the same way an inbound lead works. When they don't show, the best time to rebook them is immediately. And as the days pass, the amount of interest that they had in what you were offering is not going to go up. It can only go down unless a critical event occurs that would cause them to have more interest, and that's rare that that's going to happen. So you need to get a hold of them as quickly as possible. There needs to be an ROE in place for that. If you don't get
Yeah.
that thing, if you stop calling that lead within any business day, I would say, then you lose it. You got to call them every day if they know say. And if you don't, then
Exactly.
it's going to show up on this report that anyone can take,
And
because I need it called back.
there's two things there to break down. One is the typical rep will say, if I go too hard on it, I will bother them and they won't want the meeting.
Yep.
And then the second part is, no. They have something going on, so I'm not going to bother them until X and Y and Z date. And then, I need to protect it to be mine still. No one else should call because that's my opinion. But I think that if you break it down to why would they have taken a meeting? Well, if you did the call the right way, they took a meeting because they're actively looking for a solution. Do you think they're just looking at Rocket? Or do you think that they're looking at anybody who can solve the same problem that they have? Oftentimes people get beat by a different sales rep from a different company without ever knowing. And the prospect will just be like, we're not interested, because they don't like to tell them, well, I went with your competitor. They rarely say that. They just say, this isn't a priority anymore. But they actually switch to somebody else. And that's why no sits are the hottest leads we can have. And they need to be some kind of contact every day until you get their meeting reset or you get a no. Too many times we don't get a no, and we don't get the meeting reset, and we just assume they lost interest, or maybe they went with our competitors.
So you brought something up a little while ago that's important, which is like, well, how do you set the time frames? All right. Well, if it no sat, then how many days should they be able to work it until they lose the lead, or they could lose the lead if someone else calls it? So the way I would look at it is it's different for every company. You can't have hard and fast rules for it, because those ROE, or rules of engagement timelines, should be based on the sales cycle, like the historical sales cycle, in terms of like, hey, we know it takes 60 days to get a deal in, or however long that is. All right. We know based on historical data that you need to call them a certain amount of times to be able to book them. And like, once you have all of that data, then you can get an idea of whether or not it's falling within your standard like activity guidelines to get a deal in, or whether it's fell way out of it. And if it falls way out of it, that's when, all right, cool, then we should have something in place for like knowing that if there's no activity around this amount of time, we better get somebody else on there, and we better have that in the rules of engagement. You can't do that the same way for everybody, right? At Fleetmatics, we were closing deals within a 48-hour timeline from sat to closed. That's different from somewhere else. So in other words, if we sit that deal and a week later I haven't gotten an answer, there's a chance that someone else might call that deal. There's a chance that someone in ops refinery might say, hey, no one's talked to you. Saw we had a presentation, and you'd be like, man, you only gave them a week? Yeah, it only takes us 48 hours. So if I put no notes, I didn't say, hey, they need to wait for 2 weeks, and I haven't contacted them, I would expect someone to call that lead and take it from me, because that's the way that it worked. But if your sales cycle is 90 days from presentation to close, then obviously that's not going to be your rules of engagement. So you have to know your data. You have to know what's worked historically, how long things take, so you can set up the right rules of engagement. And it's a living, breathing document. You're not going to have the same revision on your rules of engagement forever. So
there it is.
tell
It
them
has
that
to
too.
be flexible, and that goes back to having a Caesar that decides to change the rules of engagement as new info comes in. Because if you can't make new decisions based upon new information, then you're no good at anything, including business. So we got through no sit, and to summarize that, especially at Rocket, if you're listening to this and you're actually in freight, like when we say no sit, that means that we didn't get the first meeting. We cold called, they were interested, but we never got them to show up. If they show up to the first meeting, that timeline expands again. If we've already presented and now we're trying to get data, it's not one day that another rep gets to call. And, then we actually understand our sales cycle is there's probably 2 weeks in there where we got to get data, and we don't even need to involve anybody else. It's all in the rep. Then we have other team members get involved because we've got an active lead and everybody wants to close it. So the behavior that we're teaching the sales team is cold call, cold outreach, get them to a meeting, sit the meeting, show them our solution, and this is your lead. And the rest of the team is going to help you anyways. Michael and Troy and Gabe and Troy and Caitlin, we're all going to help after that point anyways. It's just that we have to reinforce the behavior with the rules of engagement of like incentivize them to do exactly what they need to do to get paid. And at Rocket, there's no better place to be a sales rep because we close such a high percentage of the deals that get to the funnel. And now we just need to refine how many deals get to funnel. But what about between no sit and then close lost? There is a no man's land, but we'll cover that in close lost. A deal didn't close for whatever reason. What would you suggest for ROE on that for Rocket, but also like for anybody?
So if you close lost an opportunity, right, then it's generally saying that you're no longer working it. You didn't make the sale on this. They're not interested. Right. Doesn't necessarily mean that you're booting it out of your funnel, but it's not going to close within our typical guidelines. Right. So you could say, so I think that it's fair on close lost if someone was like, hey, this one's closed lost for now. I'm going to follow up with them next quarter. And if you have a follow up date scheduled for that amount of time, fine. If you miss that follow up date, right, or let's say like a couple of months have passed or something like that, and at here I would say if it's closed lost, then unless there's a note about follow up, then it's fairly open for business because it's no longer in the funnel of that salesperson unless they've stipulated, hey, it's closed lost and we're working this amount. Will be easy for us to do trial and error on this because we're not really running into the issue where someone's running after your closed lost the second that it gets lost and everything like that. So we can kind of figure it out as
Yeah,
we
we have
go.
a blank slate because we've never really worked close loss, because if it was close loss, we just moved on. We're just going so fast. We just go after new ones. But I brought
Yep.
this up earlier. We continue to bring out new products and new integrations that may suddenly become relevant to the closed loss deals.
Yep.
And that's where it's like, hey, I can think of 3 accounts off the top of my head that we didn't land because we didn't have final mile and it wasn't integrated the way we needed it. And now we do. So how do we get those back, and who should go get them? I think, obviously our enterprise sales team should,
Yep.
because I think that that's the highest probability we close it. But there is some fairness, or, maybe it's like, well, that rep worked it. How do we, it's a sore subject, or
Yeah.
at least it's tender, right? Like you got to be a little careful because I was a founder led sales. You were always in sales. Like you do not want to, I don't know, knock a gift horse in the mouth, I guess I would say. I don't know if that's the right analogy, but I'm going to use it, because if a sales rep is continually producing outbound and you don't reward them by letting them have commission on a closed lost one that you ended up reviving, then you could step on their toes and say, hey, we don't care about your outbound effort unless you're always right 100%, even if our product isn't there.
Yep.
If it's not a product question, there is no question. It's anybody's.
Yeah. I'd say closed lost is probably the one that's probably the toughest. I think the rule of thumb in the past where I've worked, again, short sales cycle on that particular one, I think we gave it 3 weeks of no activity and it being in closed lost. They also harped quite a bit on if it's not closed won and it's not a maybe, then you need to move it to close lost. So for example, I had a Excel spreadsheet that had all my deals on it. And they were color coded: green, yellow, and red. Green meant I closed them. Deal's done. God bless. Yellow meant maybe. They haven't signed yet. They haven't said no yet. They're in limbo. And red was no.
Yeah.
I'm not closing this one. I've parted ways with them. And we had strict timelines. In other words, that if they were still thinking about it within a certain amount of time, we were going to part ways with them. We were going to say, all right, I wish you the best on your future business endeavors. We don't chase, we replace. We're moving on to the next one. And
Oof.
my goal wasn't to get the most amount of green on my spreadsheet. It was for me to have no yellow. So I didn't care if it went green or red. I'd rather it go green, obviously, but I didn't want any yellow. I wanted to find a way to either get them to buy or get them to leave. It was one or the other, and then I was moving on. And if you do it that way and it's managed that way, then you're going to have a good amount of closed loss,
Yeah.
and it might be of decent value. But if that's a good sales cycle for what you're offering, no one really cares in sales because they're getting enough in on their plate for them to turn the next ones into closed one. And then it's like, all right, well, what do you do with all of those? Right? What and who works this ROE? Like there's 2 types of reps to look out for when it comes to once you need a rules of engagement, right? There's lead pissers and lead stealers. Those are the 2 different kinds, right? So what's a lead pisser, right? It's someone that's placing activity on leads just to keep them. It happens a lot on outbound where you're rewarding outbound with inbound, right? Where they're
Yeah.
making the call, they ain't doing shit when they're calling. They're like just putting a touch point on there. And then the inbounds come in and they've called enough outbound leads that they know an inbound will eventually come in and they'll ask for it. I was working that one. All right, cool. This is where the Caesar comes into place, right? Where it's like, all
Yeah.
right, cool, let's take a look. No notes. You've dialed it twice in the past 90 days. No voicemail. Nothing actually on the account. What? So can you tell me a little bit about it? Right. So
I
they're
called.
challenging ROE. They're asking for the inbound. Tell me about the pain. Tell me about the customer. What have you said with them and everything like that? Well, I called and I couldn't get a hold of them. Well, that's not yours. That you don't
No.
get rewarded for calling it and having nothing happen. That's no, because then every single thing that you call, you just get the inbounds on. And if that's the case and you have a good inbound lead engine, I'll make 500 dials a day that are unique dials on what I know is our ICP, and I'm pissing on leads. So then I get all of the inbounds, right? You're cheating. You're not, and that's not a motion that results in success for the team.
Or
So
for the
you're like
company or for the
yeah,
rep, except for when the inbound motion works.
yeah,
I thought when you said lead pissers, I thought it meant the rep that went and took a piss the most, because like that we all know that one person who pees a lot, and
yeah.
so I thought that's what it was. But I'm pleasantly surprised with your definition. So
Yeah, well, I mean that can happen too, or you're out on a cigarette break and everything like that. I think that's more back in the day. I feel like there's not as many smoke break people. God,
uh,
dude, at Fleetmatics, half the team was on a smoke break. I was like, man, this is crushing our activity.
yeah.
I'm really pleased with less people smoking. It's really helped with activity.
Better
And
now.
then,
Actually, we still get the nicotine. Just people are using Zyn pouches.
yep.
You don't
So,
have to leave the desk for that.
yep, the
All right.
Zins really helping.
So lead pissers and lead something
Lead
getters.
stealers, right? So
Steelers.
like these are the ones that are looking. So both of these are a judgment call because you kind of can't prove what you think is happening, but you know what's happening, right?
Yeah.
So you kind of know when someone's pissing on a lead, but they're not going to leave a note that says, "Hey, I'm pissing on this one, so I get to get the inbound off of it." Like, no. So you're going to have to look into it as the manager and make a
Yeah.
determination because based on the rules, it's like, okay, they called, okay, and by the way, you can't escape them cheating. You can't.
No.
You go, oh no, I'll say they have to call and then they also have to leave a note. Or, oh, they have to have a call and then there has to be like they will find a way around whatever your qualifier is for them to follow the path of least resistance. And you might
Yep.
say, well, not my guys or gals or not my sales team. It's like there's always going to be a couple. I've
Well,
been
I
in enough
also
sales floors where I know you could have tried to hire the best people possible. There's going to be a few. And you almost want people that
yeah,
try
I
to
was gonna say
manage the
like
game a little bit.
you want to hire people of high integrity, but if you're going to take chances and grow a startup as quickly as possible, you're going to run across people who are highly effective that push the boundaries of rules of engagement. That does not necessarily they don't mean they don't have integrity. Like you have to be able to judge them separately of them trying to grow their book of business and like make sure that they have, food on
Yep.
the table and can earn. And you don't want, I would rather have to, I don't know what the analogy is, but I'd rather have to pull somebody back than poke them with a stick to do something. Right. And so there is a fine line there. But I think that the bigger takeaway for rules of engagement on lead stealers or lead pissers is if you don't have a Troy Barter, somebody who was in a sales seat who now runs the team, right? And you have a mid-level manager who's never actually sold, and you let them be Caesar, you'd be better off not having rules of engagement and not having the Caesar, because they're going to make the wrong decisions. And so you live by the sword
Yeah.
on that. If you have somebody thumb side up or down, they have to make the right decision nearly every time. And it has to be the right one for the org,
Yep.
and make sure that your top performers want to stay at the org.
Yeah, because it can hurt motivation quite a bit if you make the wrong
How
call. In
many
fact, it's
reps
going to
have
hurt it even if you make the right call sometimes.
How many
Just
top performers have quit a company because of their stupid rules of engagement or bad management? Like every top
absolutely,
performer leaves
yeah.
because of that stuff.
I had a falling out with a rep, like specifically because of rules of engagement, who's someone that like I went on vacation with. We were good friends. He moved into the same neighborhood as me. And when I moved into my first house, so we'd be close by and everything like that, like one of my boys. And like because of rules of engagement, I'll never talk to him again. He owes me $544 when I work the taxes out. And that's like how I operate, is that if you wrong me, like for real wrong me once, that's all it takes. I will never talk to you again. I was on the floor with him for probably another 3 years, never said a word to him ever again, because an inbound lead came in And we like it. I was the AE that worked it. I know. I remember this vividly. They had, so at Fleetmatics, when you're selling GPS tracking, you need to have company-owned vehicles for you to track them, right? They had no company-owned vehicles, right? But their drivers sign something that says that during these work hours, it's your vehicle, like essentially, right? So they needed to be tracked during that amount of time. Their owner operators that owned the vehicle needed to have tracking. And we have plug and play units that they can unplug at the end of the day. And you know if they unplug them during the day. All right. So I did that discovery and figured that out. And then I
Yeah.
closed them on that call. So the way that it worked was my boss called over to the boss that was on the other team because someone had called it beforehand and disqualified it when it came in inbound. They disqualified it because they had no company-owned vehicles. So then we got
Yeah.
an inbound and then we started working it. So my boss reached out to their boss and said, hey, we're working this. It looks like you guys DQ'd it. Can we work it? And they said, yes. Guy was in the bathroom at the time. He said, I'm not in front of my computer, but if it's disqualified on our side, go after it. We're obviously not going to. Well, the problem was I closed it too quickly. I one call closed it, and it was a big deal. And I one call closed the deal. It was closed within an hour of the inbound being submitted. We had paperwork. It was done. And that was enough time. So it closed so fast that he wasn't able, that boss of the other side wasn't able to talk to his boss and say, hey, they're able to work this deal. They just saw a deal come in that they knew that technically based on rules of engagement should have gone to them. And that other boss said, even though I said that you guys can work it, we've changed our mind. So then it went to my boy, who was the closer on the other side. And he made like $800 commission off of it. When you work the taxes out, it's roughly around $544 exactly. Right. So I hit him up and I said, dude, you're going to pay me this out of pocket at the very least, or tell them that it's not fair and it should go to me. Right. You didn't even talk to them. In fact, you disqualified them when you shouldn't have. So you
Yeah.
actually actively screwed the deal up, and then I saved it and one call closed it, and I'm being penalized for closing it too quickly. And he was like, nah, man, can't do it. I was like, all right, cool. Never talk to you again.
So
That was it. Like, so rules of engagement has worked wrong. And who was my boss at the time? Never sold a day in his damn life. So of course he had to give the deal up because he did the same bitch made move the week before on another deal that went to us. So he's
yeah.
like, well, turnaround's
And then
fair
it's
play.
just
And
tit
it's
for
like, well, there
tat
you
back
go.
and forth.
You've never sold before. So John, you never sold before. We can keep that one in. John, you've never sold before. So obviously, of course, you're going to not know how to work rules of engagement. So there's two other things that I did want to cover, because what is a lead stealer, right? The reps that look for deals that they can take, and they're looking for deals that they can take more than they're looking for deals that they can make. Is probably the
Yeah.
best way of putting it, right?
And
They're
we
looking
all
to
know those
steal
reps.
things. They're
We've all
not
met them.
looking to create anything. And what will they do? Well, all right. Well, this one, he hasn't called it, and it's going to hit the 90-day mark in 3 days. Maybe I call it on my cell phone and see what the deal is ahead of time and tell him that I'm going to reach out in a few days just to make sure that I kind of got my foot in the door in the second that it becomes available. I get a hold of him, and he already knows, and he's going to say that he's working with me. Like they work little ways to finagle and cheat rules of engagement. The same way that the other side is looking to protect the leads, they're looking to steal the leads, and they're looking to do it in an unscrupulous way a lot of the time. Right.
Yeah.
So what's the difference between a lead pisser and a lead stealer? A lead stealer can be useful, and a lead pisser never is, because they're actually not looking to get sales. They're looking to cheat. The lead stealer is still looking to work the deal. They're just looking for easier deals to work. You see what I'm
Yeah.
saying?
And I
So
think that from a CEO perspective, and this is going to sound backwards, but from everything I've said earlier in the episode, which is like, it just matters that Rocket gets the account, right? So you would then apply that logic to lead stealers and be like, well, as long as that rep is the best rep, I'll let them steal whatever they want. But that's where it has to have a fine line of
yep.
the right Caesar and the right judge
So
in
yeah,
place,
and there's
because the story you told, and we'll have to clip that and do some micro content around that story.
yep,
I don't know how many years it's been, but you remember. I have similar stories of my selling days and
yep.
reps that I could name, but I won't. But reps who would purposely be lead stealers, or who worked the ROE in their favor and like knew that it screwed me over, etc. However, if the organization, whoever is Caesar, doesn't correct that behavior and reset the culture and be like, hey, look, we want to win, but we don't cheat each other just to get revenue, then you lose the top performers who are disgusted by that and who work hard and do everything the right way, and then they end up not being rewarded because the lead stealers, and those people start looking for other jobs.
Yep.
And short term you get the revenue, long term you can't sustain it, and then it doesn't become predictable repeatable revenue because you lose your top reps, or maybe you lose your second and third best rep but you keep the top performer who's actually not good for culture. That's important.
So lead stealers can be useful. You can use them
Yeah.
for ops refinery, right? So what is ops refinery? All right. Well, if there's enough no sits, let's say that you got a team of 20 salespeople, you're gonna have a lot of no sits. I can tell you that right now. You're gonna have a lot of no sits that end up not really getting worked. You might get a lot of inbounds in that they couldn't get a hold of the first couple of tries, and then they stop working them. And then all of a sudden those inbounds aren't being worked. You're going to get a lot of closed lost opportunities that all of a sudden aren't being worked the same way that they were in the past. And so all of this stuff is just a leak. These are different leaks that are in the pipeline that aren't going to get worked. So what ops refinery is you take somebody and you say, you literally can't work anything but those deals. That's all that you work is ops refinery. Verizon Connect, who bought Fleetmatics, still does this to this day. I was just talking to my friend Mason, and that's all he does. He's like, yeah, they got me on ops refinery. So they're still doing the same play from a decade ago. And that's all that he works. So if you think about it, like right now, that's a leaky funnel. No one's working. We're getting nothing out of it. You put Mason on that. All right, well, Mason's going to hit target. So now all of a sudden, what no one wanted turns into deal after deal after deal because that's all that their specialization results in good things. But I'll close on this story in terms of how to break off when you're getting a lot of lead stealers and everything like that. Let's say that you have a couple of different teams. We had that issue where I was a director and we had another director, and they kept taking our deals and we kind of couldn't prove it, but like we knew that they had reminders set the second that it came, like in the activity wasn't marked, they'd grab them. So rest in peace, my man's Chris Gillis, who was a guy who came in and he said, first day when he introduced himself, he said, I'm here to make money. I'm not here to make friends. And he would find, even when he was a new SDR, he would start to find those deals the second that they became available because he was smart. He was a hard worker. Dude was a hustler, right? A real hustler. So you could kind of draft SDRs in the training class onto your team. And I drafted Chris. And I talked to my best SDRs and I said, we've got Chris over here. I know you guys have had some issues with him grabbing something the second that it falls out of ROE. We're going to put Chris on on all of the other team stuff because no one's changing the ROE. We're going to beat them down so bad at their own game that they're going to beg to change the rules. And within 2 months, that's exactly what happened. It got to the point that was my team's brand. They steal all the deals. And I was like, nope, we weren't doing that at all. Y'all's side did. So we decided that we were going to show you how it feels. And we did it better than they did. And then the rules of engagement quickly changed where it was like, nope, it's not this amount of days. It's actually this amount of days. And it's like, all right. So, but that's a perfect example of like, did I cry about it? Didn't even bring it up to my RVP. Not at all. I said, all right, cool. If I want the rule to change, I'm going to show you why it needs to be changed by doing it better than you guys are. And that's the very simple way of being able to do it. Instead of making an excuse, instead of complaining, instead of saying that it's not fair, as long as the rules are the same for everybody, then you can take whatever edge someone else has in sales and work that better than they are in your favor. They just found the edge. They didn't get the best at it. So you have the opportunity now to see the play that they found and execute better. And when you do that, one or two things is going to happen. The rules will change to make it more fair, or they won't, and it won't matter for you because you're already more successful anyways, and you've exploited that. And now what made them special makes them mundane because now everyone's doing it because you proved that it works better than what they're even working it or how they're even working it. So that's enough.
And I think to summarize this entire episode about rules of engagement in the most succinct way I can is that if you're trying to grow a startup, we're in year 4 of rocket shipping. If you want to actually do it big, you have to have people that will push the envelope on the revenue side, right? And like I've always had an opinion of like exactly the type of culture and people and everything that you want to have at an org. And of course, revenue side, sales side, if you don't have killers, you're slowly going nowhere. But if you have killers and you don't give them rules of engagement, it also doesn't, create a predictable stream of revenue. It creates erratic revenue. Like you might have huge months and quarters and then maybe not. If you do create a rules of engagement and you have the right Caesar in place, you have to have somebody who's able to identify who's working the system, right? And are they doing it because they're selfish or because they just want to win? If you find people who just want to win, then you make that activity work for the org, and some people's feelings will get hurt along the way. That's the only option in rules of engagement, is that somebody's going to say it's not fair. If they don't think it's fair, we maybe communicated it poorly, but more or less it's probably because they're not winning as much. And I think some of the best leaders of orgs come from the sales side because they learn how to figure out rules of engagement or org charts or structure to game it first for themselves, because they're like, your first duty is to your family and then to the company, right? That's how it has to be. That's what we are. And then they say, hey, I can do this a little better. And if you can't find people like that because you're afraid, because they do push the envelope sometimes, then you're never going to get to where you want to go as a founder, because you have to hire people with big personalities that take risk if you want future leaders. And so rules of engagement is the topic, but the theme is, how are you growing an org with what type of people and who gets to stay and who gets rewarded for certain behaviors. It is more important than people think.
Yeah. I mean, if you have an issue with rewarding unscrupulous behavior that shows lagging indicators that they could help you on things that are scrupulous, another movie around the same time as Gladiator, just watch Catch Me If You Can with Leonardo DiCaprio, right? Dude was wanted for forgery, and then who hired him? Who was it again? It was the Treasury Department, to make sure that other people couldn't do the things that they were doing, like that he was doing. All right. So like, if you don't like what I'm laying out for you and you think that that's dishonest, then your government is dishonest. If you think sales is dishonest, go get a quote from a plumber and just have your wife be the person that got the quote. And then you try to get the quote and you tell me whether or not white collar sales is dishonest. Everybody's working a game here, man, and some might be a little bit more scrupulous than others in the way that they do it. But the reality is, people get creative, and people will, when pushed, people will, sometimes go a little bit harder than they need to. But I'd rather have the one that would go a little bit harder than they probably should and then put in rules to corral them in and point them in the right direction, than have somebody that is a victim that's just like,
yeah,
I just can't do it. I just not fair. It's like, it'll never be fair for you. Sorry.
Yeah. There are jobs for you. They're just not at Rocket. Right. And
they're not in sales. I mean,
and I do think that, like, it does get into the larger, like, this is something I've always held true, is that there's people that have worked at Rocket. There's people outside of Rocket that have talked about it, that, sales has a negative connotation, or, you can't come off as too aggressive in sales and send too many different cold outreaches. And I just think that my answer has always been, like, our customers run businesses as well, and they respect that we want to grow our business, and that as long as we can solve their problem, they're never going to be bothered by aggressive outreach in the right tone. The same goes for the people at your organization, whether it's at Rocket or wherever you guys are listening from, wherever you work, or if you're a founder. Don't be afraid to hire people who are aggressive and who will not cut corners, but will push every boundary you set up. If you're good at it, you can motivate them to help the org, and they are good people. People will cast them out. They're not bad people every time. There are some cheats and some liars out there, and I've run into those as well. I think we all have, but more often than not, they're extremely motivated, and they're trying to win. And if you're trying to win and you get put in the right environment, you become an excellent leader. And I think that that's one of the qualities I'm always looking for.
To wrap it up, all of this stuff that we're talking about, it's funny. Like, so imagine what the buyer thinks about all of this. They don't care. They don't care about any. This is all infighting about who gets what, how should they get it. And that's why you have to keep in mind with the rules of engagement. It has to be designed for the deal to move through the most efficiently. I say efficiently instead of quickly,
Yeah.
kind of on purpose, because quick doesn't always mean good. Efficiently and effectively, and with the best buyer's experience, the best buyer's journey for the buyer, because that's what actually matters. All of the
Yeah.
other stuff is like, just how are we getting the deal in? Who should get it? Yeah, you should be incentivized. You should know that things are on a level playing field. As long as you're doing the right thing, the same rules apply to everybody, within reason. Like, all of those things make sense. But again, you got to keep in mind, buyer doesn't care. So if you set up the wrong rules of engagement and you're waiting too long until the next person calls, then your competition is going to, and they're going to get that deal before you ever could. So you want to have a rules of engagement ready, but you don't want to get away from the Wild West to the point that things are sitting dormant that your competition is going to take from you. That's probably the most important thing when it comes to getting rules of engagement going.
I think that if you summarize that statement, rules of engagement has to be made by sales, never by HR. And there you will probably find success. So, again, meritocracy above all. If you haven't seen Gladiator, apparently you can still be a good person, but I'm questioning it. Yeah. And second, catch me if you can. Take that theme and try to apply it to your business with the best people around you. And always, as always, give us some feedback. What do you think? What's the worst rules of engagement you've seen in your experience? If you're listening to this and you see this clip on YouTube or possibly on LinkedIn. And again, we'll just probably have like a bunch more episodes of these. We're having a little fun doing it. Little teaser, we're going to start bringing on some guests. So it's going to get interesting, and we're going to ask the real questions about revenue producing and career and things like that. So,
hey, if you made it this far, leave a comment on the YouTube. If you leave a comment, then just reach out to me on LinkedIn and I'll give you my tech sales course for free, just to see who made it this far. Just for
that'll be a good teaser. I like
just
it.
To see, just like it and leave a comment. That's all. I'm not going to advertise that anywhere. If you made it this far, leave a comment. I'll give you the course for free.
All right. See you guys.